Good afternoon. Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to our 10th annual Faculty Research Seminar. This is unbelievable, 10 years. I've had the honor of hosting this event every year as part of our spring enrichment and engagement days, or what we call affectionately around here Seeds Week. So thank you for helping to plant some seeds through this wonderful opportunity tonight to hear from outstanding faculty, to have a wonderful panel, but also just to share. I'm so grateful that so many students are in the room, so many colleagues are here. Thank you so much. As your host, I'm glad that all of you could join us today. I want to give a wonderful round of applause and a great thank you to a dear friend and the dean. Dean Daniel Ortiz is over here right now. But while I'm hyping him up, I know nothing gets done at this university without lots of support. So thank you to everyone at Healy Library. I love walking through the library. I love walking through and just seeing how people are treated when they enter the space. People are smiling in that front desk and people are very helpful. And I'm so grateful, Daniel, to you and your staff for understanding how valuable it is to have that kind of customer service throughout the university. I'm also so grateful to our Office of Special Events. Thank you. They have to put up with their chancellor. And every time I go into this mode of wanting something more, they always respond and they do an exceptional job of making sure that these events are always done in a first-class kind of way. Thank you for your work. Thank you for promoting this discussion today. Without you and all of the team here at the university, this event wouldn't be able to be put together. Thank you so much. I also want to recognize the Office of Community Partnerships and its director, Luciano Ramos, for helping us put together this wonderful panel that we'll have tonight. Today, we are going to continue a conversation. And that's what I love about being in this space. It's not like we're starting over again when we encounter each other. Our conversations continue, and we continue to learn from each other. We continue to share from each other. This conversation about the potential and value of community-engaged scholarship. A conversation that was in play at the Community Engaged Partnership Symposium that we held on campus just a few weeks ago. That symposium, of course, featured posters from almost 1,000 community engaged partnership programs and initiatives documented by our OCP, showcasing the great work that students, faculty, and staff, and also community members are doing together. It was wonderful to walk through all of our posters during the poster session and see faculty push their students forward so that I would know what role they played in the process. It was amazing, so thank you. This kind of research, these kinds of partnerships is what this great university is about. It's at the core of what it means to study and work here at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And we're so grateful for that. Today is about celebrating the power of our connections and also learning how we can live and how we can work and conduct our research in perfect symbiosis with our communities. What helps our students helps our communities. What helps our community members helps us. What helps us helps our students, and we're so grateful for that. And so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so the three faculty members we'll hear from shortly have much to share about their own experiences with this kind of scholarship. Professor Sevian helps make her field of chemistry accessible to more students through her community work. Professor Tang thinks critically about the role of public institutions in the knowledge economy. and Professor Siqueira works with different communities throughout Massachusetts, facilitating outreach and cultural exchange. Professors Sevian, Tang, Siqueira are excellent representations of the depth of research, the breadth of topics, and the reach of influence that our community at the University of Massachusetts, Boston embodies. I'm looking forward to hearing their presentations. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us today at the beginning for some, in the middle for others, in the end for some of your day. Thank you for all that you do on behalf of the university and our community and our world. More importantly, thank you for what you do for research itself. I'd especially like you to encourage you. Continue thinking creatively about how we can do more to bring our work into our community and our community into our work. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next person to come before you, who happens to be an unbelievable speaker, but more importantly, is the provost of our university, Winston Langley. What's nice about this is I was just at an event and I got a card from a person who happens to be the senior vice president of one of our major institutions here in this city. And his last name is O'Malley. And right now, he is the senior vice president in charge of a lot of money. He wanted me to make sure that a guy who taught him when he was at Boston State, who he said helped him be able to move to a position like this, taught him not once, not twice. He says he took 8 courses with you. And as a good steward of cards, and Gina's looking at me like, don't you dare give him that card without copying it or something. But I want you to know, and I want you all to know, the power of your work and what it does for generations here in a great city like Boston, where they would come up to me and say that, hey man, do me the favor. I wrote you a note on the back of this card, but you make sure your boy gets a copy or whatever, you know. But that's an amazing, amazing, amazing thing. So there it is. All right. So you remember that gentleman, right? Okay. All right. 8 classes.
Well, you know, I have very little to say after the Chancellor does, and I know what he wants. He's imposing a certain burden on me in this. But you see how well he goes about it. Thank you, Chancellor. I'll simply say that all science, all learning that is worth preserving is the offspring of human experience. However abstract it appears, however applied it may be, it is the offspring of that experience. And in our case, the focus on engaged scholarship, as the Chancellor indicated, it has a special feature to it because it speaks to our interest in the concept of inclusion and the connectedness that exists between and amongst things and between and amongst peoples. So it is my particular pleasure to introduce to you the first of our speakers, and I want to say something about her. Anna Sevian has been a faculty member at UMass Boston since 2001. She's an associate professor in the chemistry department and a member of the Center of Science and Math in Context. She's a recognized national leader in science education, and from 2009 to 2011, she served as a program officer in the Division of Undergraduate Education and the Division of Research on Learning of the National Science Foundation. She was a principal investigator of the National Science Foundation-funded Boston Science Partnership, the second largest grant in the University of Massachusetts history, and she was featured in Science magazine, if you know the Science magazine, as one of the two outstanding journals in this area, as a model for science education in the country. A model for science education in the country. She has an interesting background that I'd like to touch on as you listen to her. She earned a PhD in 1992 in physical chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a master's in philosophy and an MS degree in chemical physics from Columbia University. She has a BS degree in chemical engineering and a BA in chemistry from the University of Colorado, Boulder. She brings all of this training and modes of inquiry to bear on her teaching and her research. Well, her training also includes postdoctoral work in theoretical polymer chemistry at Dartmouth College, 7 years of teaching chemistry and physics in English and Spanish in urban and rural public high schools. And she's part of experimental materials in science research about which we can think very, very yearningly. The neighbor here, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I am very pleased to introduce to you Hannah Sevian.
Thank you, Chancellor Motley and Provost Langley. It's a great honor, and I hope I can live up to the introduction. I would like to speak about chemistry learning, and not just chemistry learning for those who will become chemists or those who have the privilege and the opportunity to have good chemistry education, but I mean chemistry learning for everyone. I'd like to focus on the idea of relevance, and I'm going to show you some examples of what I mean by relevance throughout this talk. But to me, relevance means making something that has relevance for those for whom it is most important. It's about access and equity of everyone to chemistry education. And relevance is communicated not only in what the subject is, but also in how we walk through that subject. It's communicated in the curriculum. It's communicated in how we teach chemistry. It's communicated in how we think about chemistry and what we use chemistry for. I think that relevance is a lot like what the priest at my church talks about on Sundays. How we are communicates what we do. Relevance can be extrinsic or intrinsic. It can have value for the present or future. It has value for ourselves, but it also has value for society. And most importantly, relevance is about consequences. What do we do with what we know? It's not just about what we know. So as Provost Langley talked about, there are many perspectives that I bring to thinking about and working on with many people, chemistry education. I started in chemical engineering. I did a PhD in theoretical chemistry, and then I became an inner city high school teacher. I started at UMass Boston in both teacher education and in chemistry, and now have moved entirely into chemistry. And moving into chemistry education research was a gradual process, because you see my training was in theoretical chemistry and chemical engineering, a little bit of material science, which doesn't necessarily prepare one to do education research. So I spent the good first 5 or so years of my time at UMass Boston really retraining and doing doctorate level work again to learn how to do education research. I began doing policy work and have expanded to think about global perspectives on chemistry education, and I think you'll see that in some of the examples coming up. Some of the first work that I did at UMass Boston was to work on the Boston Science Partnership, which was mentioned. This was an NSF-funded project from 2004 until just a short while ago. It was a very large project, involved a huge number of people, and I can't possibly name all of them. It was funded by the National Science Foundation, and these are some of the teachers and faculty who worked together in the Boston Science Partnership. Just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of the research that was associated with it, because this is a celebration of faculty research. So one of the papers that I was involved in that came out of this asked a question, well, why do faculty get engaged in doing content-related work with teachers? And we analyzed this through a lens of identity of the faculty and how that impacted on their agency. And we found that, at least at UMass Boston, there were 5 major reasons, major motivations for involvement. One was that faculty were interested in advancing their research agendas, so they got involved with working in K-12. A second one was that they were interested in advocating environmental consciousness. I think that a lot of that is related to UMass Boston's mission and the work that we do here. Some faculty got involved because they had school-aged children, and they became more interested in schools because of that. Some were really interested in improving their pedagogy. You know, when we started, we thought that that was the big reason why everyone's going to get involved, but in fact, it turned out to be one of 5 reasons. And one of the most important reasons that we found with those who were most committed was that what motivated them was an interest in equity and social justice that was at the core of their beings. These are some of the teachers and faculty who worked together. Over the years, we took many, many photographs, and lots of them are fantastic. A lot of them have ended up on the NSF website on different public announcements. You see some of the faculty down here having fun. I've also done a lot of work with chemistry students, both here at UMass Boston and in Boston Public Schools. I study the influence of green chemistry on chemistry learning and laboratory learning, and how laboratory learning affects how students understand chemistry. Some of the stuff we've done with Boston Public Schools was a lot building on the work that I did as a high school teacher in the Boston area. So we started an AP Bridge program where students spend 2 weeks in a university laboratory doing AP level work before they start the AP course to bridge them into AP. I think that communicates a message of relevance to the students, that they can see themselves in a university laboratory. We started AP practice exams because many students in Boston haven't ever taken an AP exam before. And so having a practice exam before they took the AP exam under real testing conditions gives them an opportunity to learn about how to take an exam like that. And it gives feedbacks to the teachers on how the students are doing, so they can help prepare their students for the couple of weeks leading up to the exam. This year I engaged in a civically engaged freshman seminar thanks to the SESI program. And it's taken me on a road that I didn't know that I was going to go down, and I've learned a tremendous amount. My students have been working all year in Chris Gramampe's classroom, just down the street at the McCormick School. We've been going there once a week or once every other week, working with 8th graders in their science classes, and I think that everyone has benefited. The freshmen in my class have benefited, the students in the class have benefited, and I think Chris and I have benefited a lot too. So this work has been funded by NSF, by the Mass Department of Education, by SESI, and I wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of some of the research associated with it. So this is a paper that I'm citing here that was published by one of my PhD students and me, Kristen Cacciatore, who now is a high school chemistry teacher at East Boston High School. And we looked at what happens when you change out one lab at a time in freshman chemistry to have it be more green and inquiry-oriented. And we found that incrementally changing out labs incrementally improves learning. Now that may sound trivial, but it's really important that you do no harm first. It also gives students a sense of why they're learning what they're learning, and there's that relevance again. So it helped them improve their experimental design skills to do green chemistry and to do more inquiry-oriented chemistry than a traditional lab. I've done a lot of work with chemistry teachers. One of the things that I want to tell you about is the chemical thinking learning progression. This is a photograph of a team of 12 people who we've been working together for the last 2 years. This photo was taken last Friday. We did a lot of work at the Boston Public Schools Science Teacher Leader Retreat. You'll see up there Michael Clinshow, who's a middle school teacher at the Edwards School, Melissa Weinrich, who's a grad student at University of Arizona, Stephen Cullifer, who's in the back, he's a fifth-year PhD student in my research group, Jen Lamberts, who's a middle school teacher at the Mary Lyons School in Boston. I'll skip me. There's Greg Banks. He did his master's degree here at UMass Boston and then went through the Teach Next Year program, and now he's a high school chemistry teacher at Urban Science Academy. Becca Lewis is a high school teacher who was at the English High School up until last year, and now she's at the O'Brien. Rob Huey has taught many, many of our students. He's been at Boston Latin Academy as a chemistry teacher for a long time. And Gabby Steinberg is a postdoc in my research group, and she's also here. So this learning progression is a design cycle, and what we do is work with chemistry teachers and researchers together, because what we want to make that the research that we are doing is relevant for teachers in their classrooms. We've been designing a series of instruments to be used not only to investigate the learning progression that we're studying, how students learn chemistry from grade 8 through graduation from university, but we also want those instruments to be useful as formative assessments for teachers to use in the classroom. And that imposes a lot of design constraints that don't usually get imposed on research instruments. So that's why it's a half and half team. One of the papers that I want to highlight that's research that we just submitted is a paper that Gabby led up. And it's a paper about what changes when communities of practice merge. We have a community of practice of teachers and a community of practice of researchers, and we merge to create this community of practice of all of us working together on this chemical thinking learning progression. A couple of major things changed. How we all think about assessment in our classrooms changed, and how we do the research process and what everyone thought of the research process was a big change for us. This is from this last Friday where we did a problem-based assessment. Is that the right word? Problem-based task. We were designing problem-based tasks for every grade level in science in Boston Public Schools. That's what all the teacher leaders were there to do. And one of our instruments is a problem-based task. So we did that with all of the teachers. The challenge is to take a Pringles can and add some methane to it and create the biggest possible explosion. And that's all the instructions they get. And they have to figure out how to do it. It's a chemistry challenge, and you have to use some chemistry to do it. But you can do it without chemistry by trial and error. And what it does over the course of 3 days, if you do it with high school groups or college students, is you get to see their learning grow. And what was really cool in the 2 hours that we did this with teachers from kindergarten, actually from preschool through high school teachers, is that they all not only had a great time and learned about performance-based assessment, that's the term, I was using the wrong term, but they also learned some chemistry. Even the high school chemistry teachers realized that they were thinking about chemistry in a new way because they had to apply it. They had to apply their knowledge to think. And that's another thing that I mean by what relevance is. We're also looking at places beyond UMass Boston. One of the things that I'm most interested in, as Provost Langley talked about, is that I taught in a bilingual program. And so students who speak Spanish are a huge part of our population in Boston and throughout the United States. And I think it's really important to understand if there are ways that we can be doing a better job of teaching and helping students to learn when Spanish is their primary language. So we're working with a professor at University of Costa Rica, Helen Arce, who's in the photo, the second one from the left. You see Gabi there as well. And I did a lot of this on my sabbatical last year, and it's also funded by the AAAS. And we're studying cultural differences in the learning progression. So part of the diagram on the previous page, which wasn't visible, is a map of our entire learning progression. And one of the things that we're studying with this comparison between undergraduate students at UMass Boston and undergraduate students at University of Costa Rica is, are there ways in which cultural differences emerge in how students learn chemistry? And we're finding that environmental consciousness as part of cultural identity has an influence on how students use benefits, costs, risks, reasoning when they apply their chemistry knowledge to thinking about chemical problems. I think that this is my last one, and I want to talk a little bit about chemical education policy, or chemistry education policy. So some of the work that I've done has been to look at the new standards. Some of you may be aware that there are new national standards for science in K-12 in the United States. It came out of a framework from the National Research Council. And my collaborator, Vicente Talanquera, and I took a look through those and through the previous set of standards and looked for gains, losses, and missed opportunities. We're also looking with another collaborator, Jake Foster, who's at the Massachusetts Department of Education. We're looking at how the next generation science standards is rolling out. With some other collaborators, actually about 20 of them all over the world, we're looking at all of the science standards in almost every country in the world that has science standards and making a comparison of how chemistry is expected to be learned by students in lots of different countries and looking through different epistemological lenses of what's emphasized and what is thought to be relevant in those different countries. So I'm working with Silvia Bello Garces at UNAM in Mexico to do a comparison between the United States science standards and science standards in Mexico as our part of that contribution. Okay, so I hope that I've told you a little bit about relevance and how it plays out in chemistry education research. And I need to acknowledge that there are a lot of people and a lot of sources of funding that go into making this possible. I'm not going to name all of them, but I'm very grateful to be working with an amazing set of collaborators. So thank you. And next, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Shirley Tang. Shirley and I met when we were together in a CIS. I can't remember what that stands for. CIT, right? Something about teaching. Yes, in Chelsea, right, where I was a high school teacher. So Shirley's an associate professor of American Studies and also works with the Asian American Studies program. She's done a lot of work in public health and young women organizing. She studies race and immigration or migration, and particularly working with Asian American communities. I think that we have some exciting things to learn.
Thank you, Hannah. That was a great presentation. Hi, everyone. Hi. Before beginning, I want to thank Daniel and the library. Vera, where's Vera? She's been working very hard, as well as the Chancellor, the Provost, John Saltmarsh of NERCHI, and all of my colleagues in the Civic Engagement Scholars Initiative for their parts of making this presentation possible. I will be speaking about co-producer knowledge and student success. Think of someone in your life who has important insights about what is going on in the world locally or globally, but who has no opportunities or institutional validation to be recognized or respected as academic experts or knowledge producers. Most of us can hurt people who lack the social, economic, educational status of being taken seriously in academic hierarchies. Their work takes place without recognition in spaces that are everyday and even mundane, maximizing available resources in the domains where they have access. Their names will never appear in academic publications, and if they do, only as pseudonymed RLB subjects, but not as authors of research themselves. Yet, through their own ways of knowing and being individually, collectively, and cumulatively, they generate original archives of knowledge that should be important to our understanding of the world. Now imagine that these really are the students in our classrooms, working with us to reconnect the core activities of our university, research, public engagement, and teaching, in ways that rearticulate the values of academic life, namely knowledge production and student success, as intentionally integrated rather than contradictorily independent. On the screen are images of local site-specific co-produced public art projects from 1997 to 2005 that I co-led in Dorchester, Boston, Lowell, Revere, Lynn, and other working class gateway cities where many of the students at UMass Boston have come from. Some of the youth artists from those days went on to study at UMass Boston. They continued to produce knowledge and creative work, focusing on places and people in their communities, and also to share them in the classroom and other public spaces in the US and beyond. One of these students is Linda Tang, on the right with a heart, a big one, who is here also with her girls from Revere more than 10 years ago, who is also here presenting her digital story at the Apple Store in Boston a few years ago. And in fact, who is also here with us in the audience today. That's Linda over there. Congratulations, Linda. Linda is graduating at the end of this month from UMass Boston. In 2010, UMass Boston was awarded a $2 million 5-year federal Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institutions, or ANAPC, grant from the US Department of Education. We are one of only 4 funded ANAPC research universities in the country, and the only one in New England. With this grant, UMass Boston seeks to integrate the educational, cultural, and linguistic expertise of faculty, staff, students, families, and local communities to build, assess, and sustain an ongoing holistic program that effectively supports the college access, persistence, and graduation of underserved, under-resourced Asian American students like Linda. Connecting urgent needs of low-income Asian American students with the privileged academic priorities of research and scholarship is a significant institutional challenge that we should all collectively engage as members of our ANAPC University. Drawing on the particular histories and programmatic capacities we have in Asian American studies at UMass Boston, I describe this connection in 2 ways. First, this map illustrates how we conceptualize important aspects of our civic engagement in the Asian American Studies program directed by Professor Peter Kiang. The long-term faculty, student, alumni, community, school, family engagements across the spectrum, from elementary school to high school to community college to adult education programs to ESL classes in the senior center, reflect our programmatic commitments to working class, immigrant, and refugee community publics, many of whom are still present at UMass Boston, but some to a lesser and lesser degree as time goes on. And strategically, as a commuter university, our alumni, whose family and community identities were always so important when they were students, are still deeply embedded within the social networks, schools, community organizations, and programs with knowledge, capacities, and relationships that reach across the lifespan as long-term sustainable assets for our integrated research and teaching. Second, in my own work, I developed the connection by repositioning the relationship between academics and students, with students as collaborators and co-producers rather than consumers of knowledge and meaning. This is an epistemological shift that emphasizes the importance of faculty-students co-producing knowledge and its transformative social potential. Centering students as co-producers of knowledge has its roots in the social movements of the 1960s in Europe and the US, which challenged elitist, dominant frameworks for university education. Co-producing knowledge grows from a number of intellectual seeds, including critical social theory, with its emphasis on principles of personal self-reflection, communicative action, and social emancipation. It is also grounded in Paulo Freire's pedagogy, Legacy of Critical Pedagogy, and Frantz Fanon's Conscientischer, or the development of critical consciousness, which our 2014 honorary degree recipient, Mel King, has similarly referred to as the struggle for the mind. My work in co-producing knowledge with students draws heavily on these commitments and in the founding principles of ethnic studies and engaged scholarship in the US. Co-producer knowledge in my work reflects the investment in powerful personal and community knowing and being through a structured pedagogical framework that not only ensures profound conscientization for each individual student, but also supports a finished, high-quality product that can be shared with multiple publics, fields, and disciplines after the semester is over. Each product then contributes to a long-term archive of student and community realities. The co-construction and co-creation of knowledge and its dissemination to wide publics has been central to my work with digital storytelling in the past 10 years, through an undergraduate course that I teach annually in the spring. Some of you have seen these digital stories at our end of semester exhibitions and through the Boston Asian American Film Festival. And I know you have been moved by the power of students' individual stories. Have you? I could say more about the pedagogy, curriculum, and co-producing commitments that have been invested in each of these individual digital story products. But for this presentation, I want to focus instead on the cumulative contribution that our collective archive of over 120 of these individual works makes to critical knowledge gaps across the fields of health and mental health, K-12 and higher education, urban planning and policy, and more. Last year, thanks to a grant to support undergraduate student research from the Provost's office and my dean, Zhonghua Xia, I completed stage 1 of an analysis of the digital stories in the archive with 2 undergraduate Asian American students, Henry Ho and Kim Sun-Ti, both of whom, like Linda, are also graduating and are here today, right there in that section, the second row. This slide shows our research process and includes an overview of the research themes. I don't have time to interpret the research findings here, but I want to draw your attention to the critical social policy issues on the list to your right. The co-produced knowledge base represented by our digital story archives directly relates to the policy challenges facing our city and society. For example, many stories in our co-producer knowledge archive challenge prevailing assumptions and ideas about Asian American family structures that dominant experts impose. Our students have created stories about missing parents and family separation due to war, sickness, and low-wage work, which directly challenge mainstream research and policy studies that stereotypically link Asian American educational achievement in part to intact two-parent family structures, high family expectations, and robust family networks of influence and support. This is one of many examples that shows why our students' digital stories are impossible to ignore and how our larger project of co-producer knowledge is vital. Some of you know that very well, who is also with us in the audience. Moreover, we should all note that Asian American and Native American young women have the highest rates of suicide of any racial ethnic groups in the United States. But given this cold statistical reality, there is still a critical knowledge gap in terms of why this is the case and how to intervene. We find profound insights, however, in the co-producer knowledge represented by Francis Chow's 2008 digital story, an intense exploration of depression, suicide, and help-seeking behavior for Asian American women that with little outreach effort has reached multiple publics and disciplines at local, national, and international levels during the past 6 years. The next example grows from one aspect of Henry Ho's award-winning 2012 digital story through continuing engagement with his grandmother's Alzheimer's disease, his immigrant family realities, and his role as the bilingual grandson. Henry is completing co-production of this new website, which uses original videos, photos, and text to convey the complex meanings and confusions of Alzheimer's disease within a Chinese-American immigrant context. If fully developed, this product could be extremely useful for researchers, policymakers, and practitioners, especially given that participants in Alzheimer's disease clinical trials are typically English and white dominant, with little direct knowledge of causes, diagnosis, and management of Alzheimer's for monolingual immigrant communities of color in poverty. Let me finish with two other quick examples. This is a website representing some aspects of the knowledge base that I have created through a range of research methods, including my own archival research and critical ethnography, as well as my co-producer knowledge with students through digital storytelling and a grant-funded Web 2.0 project that focused on the specific area of land and its people in the city of Revere, known as the Shirley Avenue neighborhood. In the official story of Revere, Cambodian Americans are nearly completely invisible, though many of our students, like Linda, came from there. Even among Asian American researchers and policy advocates, few realize that the Revere Cambodian American community predates Lowell and offers community knowledge about violence, bilingual education, racial profiling, displacement, and community organizing, which Melking recognized nearly 30 years ago. Engaged community knowledge about Revere is especially relevant today because of impending decisions about the Metro Boston casino location that our own former dean, Steve Crosby, is in the midst of managing. Given that the views and visions of the Cambodian community have not been engaged by the casino proposal review process, I'm suggesting that not only my own long-term place-based community research in Revere, but our co-produced knowledge represented in the digital story archives from numerous Cambodian American students who are lifelong Revere residents addresses yet another knowledge gap for the city and state. And lastly, here is an example of demonstrating how education, conscientization, and the potential of co-producer knowledge are at work in preparing for the global. Last summer, I led a faculty-student trip to Lingnan University in Hong Kong, where we presented two panels at an Asian Pacific regional conference on service learning. The three Asian American study students, Henry, Kim, and Ji, are now all graduating. At the conference, Kim attended one session that described a service learning project in Cambodia led by an affluent university in Singapore, and she reflected, "For me, Asian American studies was never about charity. It was about empowering those from the community and possibly having these students make impact in their communities through what they have learned in the courses. Being Cambodian American with families still living in Cambodia, I honestly felt very offended when the students from Singapore spoke about Cambodia. They did not make any connections to Cambodia, besides it being an impoverished country and Singapore being a well-developed one. The students also did not think about what it would mean for them to leave Cambodia and the children without creating an agenda that would leave a long-term impact on the community. Cambodia became a platform for student learning. Why are service learning models of giving back to a lesser community still very popular? Why are countries such as the US, Hong Kong, and Singapore trying so hard to expand their service learning into a global platform when there are many local problems that need to be addressed? We do not yet have final products to fully reflect on last summer's global engagement. But our locally rooted Asian American studies students who have already participated in their own conscientization and our shared co-producer knowledge process are indeed prepared for the global and ready to do so without replicating or reproducing colonial frameworks. When I think of someone in my life who has important insights about what is going on in the world locally or globally, but who has no opportunities or institutional validation to be recognized or respected as academic experts or knowledge producers, I think of years and years of students, some of whom, like Linda, Kim, Henry, and G, have been able to graduate, and others who never did or never even came in the first place, and whose personal, family, and community knowledge are rare and much needed, as are the structures and systems of respect, support, and investment that I hope we will and continue to clarify and co-produce. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Associate Professor of Community Development and Planning, Eduardo Siqueira, who is the coordinator of the Gaston Institute Transnational Brazilian Project. He's going to discuss his work in different communities and how it integrates past and current scholarship. Professor Siqueira has published articles and book chapters on workplace safety and health policy, and Brazilian immigration to the United States. He wrote the book Dependent Convergence, The Struggle to Control Petrochemical Hazards in Brazil and the United States. And I also want to add that I'm very happy to be following Hannah and also introducing Eduardo, because Eduardo and I are participating faculty of a planning committee that successfully moved the proposal for a new PhD and master's program in TCCS, Transnational Community and Cultural Studies. And we are just waiting for a vote, maybe the last vote from the Board of Education. So let's welcome Eduardo.
So it's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. That's a very tough act to follow. I'll try to do my best. That's a very tough one. So thank you for the committee. Thank you for everybody who made this possible for me. I'll start by saying that what you're seeing today is a continuation of stuff that I started about over 10 years ago. I'm at home at UMass because I'm actually an alumni of UMass. I was in another campus at Lowell before I came here. Now I'm at UMass Boston, so I feel I'm continuing the same home. Maybe a different street, but the same home. So this is a project that I'm very happy to talk about because it was an initiative that the provost challenged me to build. He brought me here to build, and I'm very happy that it's under construction. So what you're going to see is the transnational phase of what we are trying to do. And the challenge was, let's build something here that could be considered maybe a model of how the university should engage communities and countries with the idea of transnationalism. So the project, as we developed, had two very simple goals, complex ways of implementing, but simple goals: to organize a network of faculty and students at UMass Boston, to promote transnational, transdisciplinary, transcultural research, teaching, and service activities focused on Brazilian immigrants in Massachusetts and the United States, as well as Brazilians residing in Brazil. So the idea that we'll work here and there at the same time. And to promote academic collaborations between UMass Boston University and government agencies in Brazil through short-term and long-term exchange of students and faculty. So that was the challenge. This is where we want to be. This is what I want to build. So I'm going to give given the time frame that we have, a few examples of what we have been able to accomplish so far. The framework for this is the following. More often than not, when people talk about immigrants in the United States, they tend to forget that immigrants may live in more than one country at the same time. They have more than one culture at the same time. They can speak several languages at the same time, in the same day. And because of that, their lives are cannot be defined as being here or being there. So I learned this by my work with Brazilian immigrants for a while, that it is really difficult to figure out, are you here or are you there? Because many of them told me, I don't know. Sometimes I'm here, sometimes I'm there, sometimes I'm here and there, and I am an impersonation of that. Because I connect with Brazil pretty much every other day in this university. I talk through Skype, I talk to colleagues, I do research projects there, they are coming here. I cannot say that I'm only here. The idea that we are transnational is a living experience for many of us. And I believe many immigrants live that way. They work here, but they send money to their home countries. They work here, but they are thinking about the children that they left behind, or the mothers or the parents that they left behind, or the folks who are supposed to come next year. So their lives is very determined by what happens. And with this idea, we said, okay, let's try to build this experience with students. So over the last 2.5 years, we organized this network to promote the collaboration, and specifically, we included the Brazilian Immigrant Center, which is a nonprofit organization located here in Boston, which has a long tradition of working with Brazilian immigrants for the number of issues that immigrants face, number one of which being immigration. But my previous experience has been focused on the experience of Brazilians as workers here. Many of them clean your homes, or they clean the homes of your friends. Many of them are renovating your houses or the house of your friends. Many of them you can see, you cannot tell that they are Brazilians, but they are the second largest immigrant group in Massachusetts. Very recent. They're not necessarily visible, although next month you're going to see how visible they are because the World Cup will happen in Brazil. And you're going to see as many Brazilians coming from everywhere. They never thought they were Brazilians, but you're going to know now they are Brazilians. Every 4 years you see that. So they are everywhere here in Massachusetts. And because of that, my work involves several different communities because they're really spread all over the state. So we did this, and some examples of what we're trying to do with students in Massachusetts. This is Christina Brinkerhoff, who should be here, or was here. She's there. She's also graduating, so very good, graduating sociology. She's also a Brazilian immigrant, and we connected a while ago, and fortunately, we were able to find a scholarship for her to spend 10 weeks in Rio de Janeiro, where I am from, working with a colleague of mine who visited us before she went, who is actually a partner in future research, and we found money from the Mount Sinai School of Medicine International Exchange Program for minority students. We nominated her. The idea was she left Brazil many years ago and has never been back to Brazil as a professional. And we said, it's time for students of UMass who are Brazilian immigrants to go back to Brazil to see how professional life there happens, how research happens. And she was fortunate to spend 10 weeks with a colleague of mine to discuss and to learn about something that we are now continuing to do together, which is health literacy. I am very concerned for a while now to understand how immigrants who speak several languages, or in our case, may speak Portuguese and some English, how they navigate the healthcare system here, how they understand what physicians tell them, how they make sense of their bodies in a way that mixes what they brought from Brazil and what they learned here. And what she started doing was engaging this project, which we are developing, and it became part of her final project for her master's, right, which she's completing. She decided to interview 10 Brazilian women to engage in this discussion. How is it that they take care of themselves? How is it that they define health and disease? How is it that they deal with medications, etc.? So this was one example, and hopefully She will continue to work with us because I'll show you later there's another project that is also about transnationalism. We already engaged her to continue to work with us, even though she's formally going to graduate. This is Fernanda Lucchesi, who is a doctoral student in the Department of Psychology. She's actually one of the few, if not the only Brazilian international student in Massachusetts, at UMass Boston. And I found her in a situation where she said, I want to do work with immigrants, but I've been here for a long time. I did my bachelor's here. I did my master's here. She came to UMass to do a doctoral degree in something else, in psychology, but we met. And what I tried to do is say, how about working with Brazilian immigrants? Are you interested? She said, I don't know much about Brazilian immigration. I said, but I can tell you a lot because, you're also an immigrant. Although you're a student, you are not really working on a day-to-day basis as other Brazilian immigrants are. And long story short, out of this interaction, we applied for support from OITA to have a faculty student research abroad. And her study is the following. She is interested in understanding child development, especially for, infant development. So we said, if we want to make this study really transnational, why don't we compare mothers that live now in the same place where a lot of Brazilian immigrants came from and compare what they do to their children in that city versus what the Brazilian mothers here are doing to their children, so that we can figure out how the culture and the life in the United States is changing, to what extent it is changing, how they approach mother-children relationships. And that is a work in progress. She actually went to Los Angeles for 1 year for an internship in psychology. She's back this week to continue the interviews of 40 mothers there and 40 mothers here. Very involved research because they really have to observe how the mothers interact with the children, a long set of questions. But she had never gone back to Brazil as a professional to do research because all her studies happened here in the United States. So it was the first time, and that's the picture in the city where a lot of the immigrants come from. She said, they still have horses there. I said, yeah, in some parts of Brazil, yes, you do have that kind of stuff. And it was an amazing experience for her to go back to a part of the country that she didn't know to realize how the country is really different, because that's what happens. Many of those immigrants come to the United States, but they really don't know Brazil. They came here young. Brazil is a large country, right? It's bigger than the US. So you can't really know the country unless you live there for a long time. So they go back to other places of Brazil to realize and to understand the reality of immigrants in local and here. And out of this project, I believe we're going to have a better understanding, new knowledge about how Brazilians actually are integrated in American society and how this is being translated to their young infants. Those were UMass students who went to Brazil. Now I'm going to give you examples of Brazilian students who are coming to the US. This is the most recent one. His name is Elton Francisco. He is doing a doctoral in cultural history at one federal university in Brazil. He'll stay here through August. And what he came here to do is also another transnational research. He interviewed a group of families in the same city where Fernando went, because that's where there's a big hub of sending Brazilians here, to actually build the oral history of these families. Because in many immigrants communities, what you have, and in the Brazilian case, this is the case, part of the family stayed in Brazil, part of the family is here. And nobody ever discussed and documented what happens to the family in those situations, because it is really a transnational family. Part of the family is here, part of the family is there. This is my experience, this is the experience of pretty much every single immigrant here, when the family is not unified. So his dissertation will discuss the affective and the care ties that happen. How do parents raise their children when one parent is here, the other one is there? Or sometimes the grandparent is there and the parents are here. And because he's a horror historian, he's already engaged with folks here who do public history to also practice with folks here how this is done. And of course, they were doing this for UMass Boston. So he already engaged here in collecting data. So it's been a good interaction. That's a very recent one. He's here since March. This is another student, Sandra Cavalcante, who spent 6 months here from October last year to March. She's an attorney doing a doctoral degree in public health in the School of Public Health of the University of São Paulo, with which we have an agreement that a couple of years ago we went, the provost, the director of the assistant social provost for ITA, and we built an agreement, and she was the first who came. And she came here to conduct a case study for her doctoral dissertation, which discusses the impact of labor courts decisions on workplace health and safety cases in Brazil and the US. In other words, a comparison. To what extent what the courts decide affect the safety and health of workers in the workplace, because she's a labor attorney. We also developed, and there are a few others that I could also talk about, but given the time we have, just a few examples. We developed MOUs between UMass Boston and the Brazilian Immigrant Center, which was kind of innovative at that time. We actually the university committed to work in all fronts with the Brazilian Immigrant Center, in research, in teaching, and service. Actually, the executive director of the center teaches in sociology, so it makes this communication, this interaction easier. We collaborate in the survey of Brazilian domestic workers in partnership with the center, and this survey has been very important because Massachusetts has already approved a new law here that gives rights for domestic workers. That survey that we did together was part of the data that was collected. It's almost like a Bill of Rights for domestic workers. It's one of the sectors in our workforce that had no rights whatsoever, no contracts, no formal means of employment, and the legislature in Massachusetts already approved the law that will allow it, finally, these workers to be treated as any other worker, to have the same types of rights that other workers have. And we developed memorandums of understanding with 5 Brazilian universities and the Ministry of Labor and Employment. There are more coming. The issue will be how many do you want, because there are many others that are coming. As I mentioned before, there was one from Santa Catarina. I'll have another one coming from another state. The interaction started, and now people are learning more about what they can do at UMass and the fact that this is a two-way communication. Basically, what this is a recent project. We got funded to study exactly the issues I wanted to study, which is transnationalism, culture, and health. We call this project Aqui Lá, which in Spanish and Portuguese means here and there. And what we want to do is to study the relationship between transnationalism, culture, and health. And we decided to study Brazilians and Dominicans, the 2 most recent immigrant groups. And we are doing this in partnership with the Brazilian Immigrant Center, Tufts University, and the Dominican Development Center. And the idea would be to develop new knowledge on how transnationalism, culture, and health actually interact, based on the notion that the health of immigrants in the United States cannot be seen any longer. I believe it could never be seen that way, but for many reasons, people only focus on the immigrants once they arrive here. They never paid much attention to what happens to their lives before, and to what extent their lives before interact with their life now. And what we're trying to do in this project is to discuss this. So we're interviewing Brazilians and Dominicans. We are also using qualitative methods such as photo voice, where we're going to give cameras to people to take pictures so that we can discuss. We are having what we call cultural conversations with groups of them. And I just wanted to show who the partners are, because the idea that our transnational work should involve people who have contacts with these communities. In this case, the Brazilian Immigrant Center and the Dominican Development Center. 2 groups who have connections with these 2 communities. And then I would like, because of the issue of time, to show you, I believe pictures speak more than words, pictures of this is a group of Brazilians who were here last year with Ana Madison from CPCS. We participated in the American Public Health Association meeting. A couple of them, the 2 in your left, here, in my left, Sandra and Renata already spent months here. The one in the middle, Gabriela, is coming to spend a year, arriving in August. The other 2 were former doctoral students who were with me when I was in Lowell. Over there, you have Team Seaver here. We had a meeting of our network a while ago in Boston at UMass, where we brought folks who are doing research around Brazilians as well as the Brazilian Immigrant Center, as well as students who were here at that time from this program called Science Without Borders, where Brazil is sending undergrad students to many universities in the United States, and some of them were here. And we put everybody together, those who just arrived from Brazil, those who are immigrants, those who are faculty here, that was the idea. This is a picture of our visit with the provost and the former associate provost of OITA in São Paulo. And this is the most recent visit that we just had with Skylar Coburn, the new associate provost for OITA, where we continue our conversation with the universities. And this is what I believe to be a historical moment where we signed our agreement with the Brazilian Immigrant Center. Right here on campus, this was, according to the provost, a very happy moment in the history of the university because we engaged the Brazilian community with this campus. Thank you very much.